Coming to you live from the Tino Studios in Minooka, Illinois. I'm your host, Bucky Shanks, and this is Tino Tonight. Welcome everybody to the Week 10 edition of Tino Tonight. 10 weeks down and 1 week to go in the regular season, the conference championships are taking shape and we will break that down a little bit later. But first, we're going to jump right into the Squeak of the Week. And this week we go to the Big 12 rivalry game as the Cowboys took this short trip down I-35 to Norman to face the number one team in the land. To say the Cowboys were in a shootout would be an understatement. But no, seriously, the Cowboys were in an absolute shootout with Oklahoma. If you scored 1,200 points, you should feel pretty good about things. Unfortunately, that left Coach Todd Husky's bunch just under 5 points away from victory. Oklahoma State loses an absolute heartbreaker, 1205.35 to 1200.75. The 4.60 point win is the sixth closest game in Tino history. It's almost a year's worth of history at this point, but history nonetheless. And that brings us over to Stack Watch. We got 3 teams this week. We start with the NC State Wolfpack. Week 9, they beat number 21 Syracuse, and Week 10, they beat number 21 Clemson. They had their biggest game of the season up next with literally the division on the line when they take on Florida State. Mississippi State up next as they beat number 25 LSU and followed that up with a division-shaking upset as they knocked off number 4 Alabama. Mississippi State is now on the verge of breaking into bowl territory, and they have a tanking South Carolina team in the season finale. And Wake Forest makes this week's segment by taking the same path NC State took, knocking off Clemson and Syracuse. How the mighty have fallen for those two. And we're just getting started here on Tino Tonight, but before we go any further, let's have a word from our sponsor.
Are you tired of finishing out of the playoffs in your Dynasty League? Are you tired of these 12-man leagues that are way too goddamn tough? Well, there's always Yahoo Football. We got 8-man leagues, we got 10-man leagues, we got shitty scoring systems. Invite your family, invite your friends, win a goddamn league for once. Why be playing in CBS with tough competition? Win the league, play Yahoo, have some fun.
And we jump into the conference title game scenarios as we enter the last week of the regular season, starting with the SEC. Arkansas clinched their spot last week and will play LSU in the season finale. Alabama's scenario is simple. Win and you're in. All they have to do is get through an Auburn team looking to make a final push for the playoffs. Tennessee got a gift last week when Mississippi State beat Alabama to even be in this situation, but here we are. They can clinch their spot with a win and an Alabama loss. In the Pac-12, we have 3 teams lobbying for 2 spots. Oregon can clinch with the win over Oregon State. Washington State can clinch with the win versus Washington, who is looking for a playoff spot. And Oregon State can clinch with the win over Oregon. Good luck. And a Washington State win. They can still get in if Washington State loses. They just need more points for. In the Big 12, Oklahoma clinched their spot a couple weeks ago. They face Texas in the finale. Kansas plays Kansas State and clinches their spot with a win or a Texas loss. And Texas plays Oklahoma, clinches a spot if they can pull the upset on Oklahoma, and then still needs Kansas State to pull the upset on Kansas. They might as well do a 2-team underdog moneyline parlay just in case this all hits. In the Big 10, Ohio State already clinched and they face Michigan. Wisconsin clinches with a win versus Rutgers. Michigan State clinches with a win versus Penn State and a Wisconsin loss. And last but not least, the ACC, and we have absolute chaos here. The most simple scenario was NC State's. They win, and they're in. The simplicity ends there pending what Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech do. If Florida State beats NC State, that puts those two at 7-2. With Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech both being 6-2, if they win and also get to 7-2, it would come down to tiebreakers based on points, since all 4 of these teams would have mixed and matched wins and losses among each other. Georgia Tech, they beat NC State and Virginia Tech, but lost to Florida State. Virginia Tech beat Florida State, but lost to Georgia Tech and NC State. Florida State beat Georgia Tech but lost to Virginia Tech. And if everyone is 7-2, they would have beaten NC State also. NC State, they beat Virginia Tech but lost to Georgia Tech. And if they dropped to 7-2, they would have lost to Florida State. You follow me? If all four are sitting at 7-2, that would put Florida State in the driver's seat as they have a 300-point lead over the next closest. Virginia Tech has a 200-plus point lead over Georgia Tech and NC State. Basically, we will just sit back and watch what happens as the possibilities here are endless. And that brings us into the top 25. Number 25, LSU 5-5. The Tigers beat a tanking South Carolina team to end its 3-game losing streak. They have a bowl game all but locked up at this point, just a matter of which one. A win versus Arkansas this week would go a long way for this program. Number 24, Clemson 5-5. The Tigers get one last chance in the regular season to get a win versus a ranked team when they take on Georgia Tech this week. They will look to play spoiler and put a dent in the Yellow Jackets' playoff chances while improving their bowl game. Number 23, Rutgers 5-5. The Scarlet Knights have a chance to knock Wisconsin out of the Big Ten title game with the win this week, also while helping themselves into a better bowl game. Number 22, Vanderbilt 6-4. The Commodores come in off a loss to number 5 Arkansas. They got a chance this week to wreck Tennessee's slim SEC title game hopes while potentially positioning themselves into a better bowl. And number 21, Michigan 6-4. The Wolverines have their biggest test of the season this week with number 3 Ohio State. A win here, and if some help falls their way, this team could potentially find itself in the playoffs. Number 20, Texas 6-4. The Longhorns enter the finale on a 2-game winning streak and have an outside shot of making it into the Big 12 title game as we saw earlier. Number 19, Auburn 6-4. The Tigers take a 4-game winning streak heading into the finale with Alabama. A win here, some help along the way, and Coach Timmy B might find himself as one of 16 playing for the national title. Number 18, Iowa State 6-4. The Cyclones are on the doorstep of the playoffs. They will need to show out with a huge performance this week over West Virginia to make the committee forget about the horrendous loss to Kansas State last week. Is it too little too late? Only time will tell. Number 17, Washington 6-4. The Huskies have entered must-win territory. Now in college football, every game is must-win, but this week feels even more must-win than most. Last week, Coach Tussin had the offense firing on all cylinders. Unfortunately, so did Oregon as they set a new Tino record for points in a week with 1380. A win this week versus Washington State might just do the trick for the committee and bump them into the postseason. A loss here, and they could be staring the Fiesta Bowl right in the face. Pretty successful season, however, if that's your consolation prize. Number 16, Georgia Tech 6-4. If the playoffs started today, it appears that head coach C. Bergeron would have his Yellow Jackets dancing. Amazing turnaround when you realize this team started 0-3. The 6-1 run to get to this point is one of the most impressive jobs of this season. The win last week versus Virginia Tech kept them alive for the conference championship. A win this week versus Clemson would go a long way in getting a spot in the playoffs, also keep GT alive for a possible ACC title game appearance. Recent trend on his side as well as he's ranked. It's well documented on this program how Clemson does versus ranked teams. Number 15, Oregon State 6-4. The Beavers are on a 4-game winning streak. They face off with in-state rival Oregon this week with a trip to the Pac-12 title on the line. A loss here would be costly and possibly knock them out of playoff contention. The Beavers are battle-tested as this is their 7th game this season versus a ranked opponent. Number 14, UCLA 6-4. The Bruins bring one of the best offenses in the country into the season finale with USC. A win this week is all but guaranteed, so UCLA has a very good shot at finding its way into the playoffs. A loss this week would send them tumbling into a bowl game. Number 13, Wisconsin 7-3. Frosty's Badgers have turned it on in the second half of the season, winning 5 straight. All that is between them and Ohio State in the Big Ten title game is Rutgers. Wisconsin has had the offense clicking as they have scored no less than 1,030 in the last 3 weeks. Number 12, Virginia Tech 7-3. The Hokies failed to find that killer instinct last week as they could have knocked Georgia Tech out of the ACC title game picture. Now, they must beat Miami this week and need help getting themselves there. To say this week is must win would be a huge understatement. Number 11, Michigan State 7-3. The Spartans have seen the highs and lows this season. Ranked number 1 earlier this year to damn near unranked. They now have an outside shot of making the Big Ten title game, but more importantly, they're still alive for the playoffs. They must knock off Penn State this week if they want any shot at a national title this season. Number 10, Florida State 7-4. The Seminoles have won 3 straight and find themselves right in the mix for the ACC title. They have NC State this week in a must-win game. As we mentioned a few weeks ago about this team's long-term outlook and stock in the draft next year, it's absolutely amazing they are sitting where they are. NC State, Georgia Tech, and Virginia Tech better seize the moment because backup is coming next season for FSU. Number 9, Alabama 7-3. The Crimson Tide had been rolling. Get it? Rolling? Roll Tide? Bucky, you're the worst. Rolling up until getting tripped up last week by Mississippi State. They fell from 4 down to 9 and left the door open for Tennessee to steal their spot in the SEC title game. A must-win game this week versus Auburn is next. Number 8, NC State 8-2. The Wolfpack continue to just cruise along, knocking off one ACC team after another. They have Florida State next in a win-and-you're-in scenario. Head coach Darryl Ward has a sparkling 4-0 record versus ranked teams, and he's got his group fired up for this one. Number 7, Kansas 8-2. Since losing to Oklahoma in Week 7, the Jayhawks have rattled off 3 straight, scoring no less than 1,111 points in any of those 3 contests. DJ Khaled spoke to the team after the loss, and message was received by the team. This team is getting scary at the right time. They are 1 win away from a rematch with the Sooners with the Big 12 on the line. Number 6, Tennessee 8-2. The Volunteers rebounded from their loss to Alabama in Week 9 by taking it out on Florida in Week 10 with 1,296 points. Whatever, man. Also catching a break as Mississippi State beat Alabama and leaving them a little bit of life in the SEC. With a playoff berth all but set, a playoff-hungry Vanderbilt team stands in the way in the season finale. Number 5, Washington State 8-2. The Cougars enter the season finale on a 5-game winning streak. A win this week over in-state rival Washington would send them to the Pac-12 title game. They moved up 1 spot from last week to number 5 and appear set for a playoff berth. Number 4, Arkansas 8-2. Since losing to Auburn in Week 7, the Razorbacks have won 3 straight and clinched their seat in the SEC title game. A win over LSU this week would just be icing on the cake at this point, as this team is focused this week on staying healthy and a game plan for either Alabama or Tennessee next week. Number 3, Ohio State 9-1. The Buckeyes just keep piling up win after win. Since Week 1, in a loss to currently ranked number 5 Washington State, the Buckeyes have run off 9 straight. Looking to be one of the first coaches to hit double figures in the win column, they are one of 2 teams perfect in conference play, with Oklahoma being the other. It's a rivalry game versus Michigan this week, but ultimately, Ohio State has nothing to play for. The plane tickets for the conference title game are already booked, and their seat in the field of 16 is already set. Just a matter of seeding at this point. Number 2, Oregon 9-1. Everyone can thank USC for this problem called Oregon. Any weakness this team might have had prior to those trades, it's been filled and then some. This team isn't just winning, it's destroying teams. Anything under 1,150 for this team feels like a failure, or 7 starters must have gotten injured. Regardless what happens next week, I sincerely wish the best of luck to whoever has to play this team in the playoffs. Number 1, Oklahoma 9-1, receiving all 10 first place votes. Bucky's preseason number 1 pick continues to make me proud. Similar to Oregon, this team also scores by the boatload. They did suffer a scare last week as they pulled it out versus Oklahoma State by under 5 points, but you see the type of effort it takes to even get close to this team. Oklahoma clinched its Big 12 title a couple of weeks ago. Along with Ohio State, the Sooners are the only other team perfect in conference play. Texas is up next for the favorites to win the national title this year. And we got the bowls if the season ended today. In the Gator Bowl, we'd have Mississippi State versus Florida. The Outback Bowl would feature Miami versus Texas Tech. And the Citrus Bowl would feature Nebraska versus Arizona State. In the Peach Bowl, Syracuse versus California. The Cotton Bowl features Baylor and LSU. And the Orange Bowl, we'd have Clemson taking on Rutgers. The Fiesta Bowl would be Vanderbilt versus Michigan. And the Rose Bowl has Texas taking on Auburn. The Sugar Bowl would be Iowa State versus Washington. And the playoffs if they started today. Number 1 Oklahoma would be taking on number 16 Georgia Tech. Number 8 NC State would be taking on number 9 Alabama. Number 5 Washington State would be taking on number 12 Virginia Tech. Number 4 Arkansas would be taking on number 13 Wisconsin. Number 6 Tennessee would be taking on number 11 Michigan State. Number 3 Ohio State would be taking on number 14 UCLA. Number 7 Kansas would be taking on number 10 Florida State. And number 2 Oregon would be taking on number 15 Oregon State. And that'll do it for Tino NCAA and Tino Tonight. For everyone here at Tino Studios in Buckingham Palace, I'm Bucky Shanks. We'll see you next week. Good night, everybody.